this is Warhawk Beyond 2040, bringing to you another edition of the Wrestling Discussion Series. And March 24th, 1997 marks 28 years ago that history was made on Raw when Bret Hart officially turned heel the night after WrestleMania 13 after his legendary submission match against Stone Cold Steve Austin, thus turning his back on the US fans. And for today's special edition, I am going to be discussing the success and failures of Bret Hart's 1997 heel run from March 1997 to November 1997. So, Bret Hart, as we all know, one of the true wrestling legends and one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. And Bret Hart has always been known as a master submission specialist and one of the finest technical wrestlers in the world. But one thing that gets overlooked and probably largely ignored is Bret Hart's promo work. Now, by his own admission, Bret Hart has never been much of a talker. Bret Hart has always prided himself on being a wrestler, and he has always preferred to let his actions in the ring speak for himself. So, Bret Hart's promo work during his heel run in 1997, for my money, was probably his best stuff ever. Bret Hart as a heel, he wasn't what you would call your traditional wrestling heel. He wasn't a case of a bad guy winding up the fans and getting under their skin. Bret Hart spoke from, no pun intended, from the heart. He told the truth, he spoke his mind, and became very outspoken about the changes that was going on in the WWF at the time. And Bret Hart's heel turn in 1997, you could look at it as kind of justified. It wasn't a case of he attacked the biggest babyface and got nuclear heat. His heel turn was very different to what you would see in the wrestling business. And the seeds for Bret Hart's heel turn could be traced back to late 1995 when he faced Diesel at Survivor Series 1995 in a no holds barred match. Now, Bret Hart did defeat Diesel for the WWF title, but something happened. He still got a lot of cheers, but there were a few boos, but nothing to really go mad about. So, as we headed into 1996, it was very clear that something was going on. Fans were starting to change, although the Attitude Era hadn't really started properly. There was a clear transition with how wrestling fans were feeling at the time. Fans felt at the time that baby faces were getting bland and suddenly heels were getting more cheers. The first sign that the fans started to boo Bret Hart was at the Royal Rumble 1996 when he faced The Undertaker. Now, of course, Undertaker is a very beloved figure and the fans absolutely adore him. And the fans love Bret Hart too. But during certain points of that match, when Bret Hart had the advantage, I did notice there were some boos. Maybe not terrible boos, but there were still boos. But nothing really happened. Both men were baby faces, both were beloved, although I think Undertaker had the more edge with the fans in terms of popularity and love. But the fans still love Bret Hart, but nothing much happened there that would warrant a heel turn yet. So, as we headed into WrestleMania 12, Bret Hart defended the WWF title against Shawn Michaels in a 60-minute Iron Man match in the main event. Shawn Michaels defeated Bret Hart due to sudden death, so the match was put into overtime because their entire match went without a single pinfall or submission. And Bret Hart, of course, lost the WWF title and he disappeared. He was gone for most of 1996. We wouldn't really see or hear from Bret Hart for a very long time. And while Bret Hart was away, Shawn Michaels was the top guy as the WWF champion. And during 1996, Stone Cold Steve Austin was starting to get very hot. He won the King of the Ring tournament and was making a lot of noise with the fans. So while all this is going on, Bret Hart is absent. So Bret Hart would make his official return at Survivor Series 1996 in Madison Square Garden and faced Stone Cold Steve Austin in a singles match, which for me was probably the best match of the show. I thought it was an excellent match, just a straight wrestling match between two guys who didn't like each other. And around this time, during the build up to Survivor Series 1996, Stone Cold Steve Austin was making comments about Bret Hart and saying how he felt about him and really making Bret Hart look bad. So Bret Hart came out. He mostly got a big pop, although there were a few boos, but fans were just happy to see Bret Hart back. And Bret Hart beat Stone Cold Steve Austin in the middle of the ring. But you could clearly see that things weren't right. Bret Hart wasn't really the hitman of old. He became a lot more bitter, a lot more frustrated, and made his opinions very clear about how things were going in the company at the time. But he still wasn't really looked at as a heel. Fans just looked at him as a frustrated guy who couldn't handle the fact that Shawn Michaels had beat him, which was pretty much what Stone Cold said as well. So as we head into 1997, during the Royal Rumble match, Stone Cold cheated to win the Royal Rumble, thus eliminating Bret Hart, even though Bret had already eliminated him earlier in the match, but the referees didn't see it. And Bret Hart absolutely blew a gasket and started screaming about how he felt screwed and was yelling at Vince McMahon. He was yelling at everyone, saying, "What are you going to do about this? I got screwed," you know? So Bret Hart was becoming more and more frustrated. So as we moved along throughout the early parts of 1997, Bret Hart was becoming more and more bitter and was walking around with a huge chip on his shoulder, and he was starting to be referred to as a crybaby. And the fans were clearly, although still cheering for Bret Hart, fans were getting very fed up of Bret Hart's constant whining and leaning more towards Shawn Michaels. So Bret Hart would win the WWF title at In Your House Final Four, defeating Undertaker, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Vader. And Bret Hart would lose the WWF title the next night to Psycho Sid, and Bret Hart would angrily challenge Stone Cold Steve Austin to a match at WrestleMania 13, and the match would be contested under submission rules. But around this time, Bret Hart got a rematch against Psycho Sid in a steel cage. He would lose thanks to interference from Undertaker and Stone Cold, even though Stone Cold actually said, "I was trying to help you, Bret, because I want our match to be for the WWF title so I can beat you." But that wasn't the case. And the next thing that happened marked a huge turning point, not just in wrestling, but there was a huge shift in Bret's character. Bret Hart got on the mic and started swearing and using profanities and just absolutely went ballistic and pretty much said, "I have been screwed ever since I came back. I've been screwed by the WWF fans. I've been screwed by the WWF. I've been screwed by the boy toys, Shawn Michaels, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Undertaker. Everyone's out to get me. Everyone's screwing me. And Vince McMahon left ringside from his commentary desk and tried to calm him down. And Bret angrily shoved Vince McMahon on his ass. And Bret Hart screamed, "Frustration ain't the goddamn word for it! Everybody knows I'm the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be." Although Bret Hart didn't turn heel that night, it was clear that Bret Hart was changing. Fans really started to go off Bret Hart in a big way, but they wouldn't actually turn off completely until WrestleMania 13. Now, some people have said that Bret Hart's meltdown marked the start of the Attitude Era. It's very hard to pinpoint when exactly the Attitude Era started. Some people say Stone Cold winning the King of the Ring in '96 was the start of the Attitude Era. I wouldn't say it started the Attitude Era, but it was an important moment and got the ball rolling, so to speak. Some people have said Shawn Michaels versus Mankind at In Your House Mind Games started the Attitude Era. I wouldn't really say it did, but it definitely marked the shift in the style of the in ring action. So there are certain moments. I mean, this is something we can talk about for another time if you want, about when exactly the Attitude Era started. But I would say there were definitely key moments that helped set the stage for the Attitude Era. I wouldn't really say, oh, that was the moment it started here. Oh, no, it was definitely over there it started. But Bret Hart's meltdown after he lost in a steel cage match, I guess you could say started it, because a lot of people have been saying recently Bret Hart started the Attitude Era. I wouldn't say he started it, but he played an important role, no question. And I suppose if you really want to look at the turning point for the Attitude Era starting, I guess you could say it was this promo, because it was very rare to see Bret Hart lose it like that. I mean, Bret Hart has always, for the most part, been a very quiet, calm guy, very laid back. So to see Bret Hart go absolutely nuts, aggressively shove Vince McMahon, you could clearly see that, okay, something's going on here. This ain't the Hitman we know and love. This is different. So we come to WrestleMania 13, Stone Cold versus Bret Hart in a submission match with Ken Shamrock as the special guest referee. WrestleMania 13, in all honesty, wasn't a great show. I mean, the main event, Undertaker versus Sid, was garbage. As much as I love Taker and I respect Sid, it wasn't a great match, but it was cool to see Taker main event the show in his classic attire and win the world title. Doesn't get any better than that. But the match itself was terrible. But Stone Cold versus Bret Hart was probably the only good match of that entire show. It was excellent. It was violent. It was bloody. It was emotional. It told a great story. Bret Hart came out to a very mixed reaction, although still more cheers, but it was still a very mixed reaction. Stone Cold came out, he got a massive pop, even though he was the heel. And Bret Hart was playing a lot more dirtier, a lot more violent, a lot more aggressive, and doing things that he normally wouldn't do, because Bret Hart, by this point, was always known as a wrestling mat specialist, using his technical skills and scientific knowledge to wear down a body part or just wear down his opponents. Bret Hart was playing a lot more meaner, so you could definitely see a shift going on with his character. But the moment came when Bret Hart busted Stone Cold wide open and locked in the sharpshooter. And of course, we all remember that iconic picture of Stone Cold's bloodied face refusing to give up, and Bret Hart just locked in the sharpshooter as hard and tight as he could, and Stone Cold eventually passed out in the middle of the ring. He didn't tap out, he didn't say I quit, but he just passed out. And Bret Hart by default won the match. And the fans booed Bret Hart, but they will boo him even more as he would start using a chair on Austin's legs, thus getting more heat from the fans. So Bret Hart had pretty much did what he set out to do. He defeated Stone Cold and was a heel. And I loved what they did in that match. It was a double turn. The way Bret Hart and Stone Cold switched roles so beautifully. I mean, you wouldn't really notice if you paid close attention because at the start of the match, Bret was the face, Austin was the heel. By the end of the match, Bret Hart was the hated heel and Stone Cold walked out the beloved hero. Even though Stone Cold lost, he won the fans' respect, and Bret Hart unfortunately lost the fans' respect. But we wouldn't really know where Bret Hart's head was until the next night on Raw, when Bret Hart delivered, in my opinion, probably one of his best promos, if not his best promo ever, and he officially turned heel. Now, what made this heel turn different was Bret Hart didn't come out whining or crying, you booed me, you turned your back on me. He made a lot of good points. And even though you still hated Bret Hart, what he was saying, you couldn't help but agree and think to yourself, you know what? I'm not a fan of this guy's actions, but he's kind of right. You know, it's one of those few heel turns you can look back on and say, you know what, I completely agree. Bret Hart talked about how he got screwed. He talked about how he was treated. He talked about how the fans had changed and they condoned, you know, violence and all sorts of stuff, and how they cheer for bad people over the good guys. Tremendous stuff. Really tremendous stuff from Bret Hart. He spoke from the heart and just aired his grievances as the fans booed and booed him even more. Bret Hart was just pretty much saying, "This is exactly what I'm talking about," you know. So if you fans are going to be like that towards me, you know what? The American fans can kiss my ass. I'm not having it anymore. And it was quite an amazing turn because some, in my opinion, the best heel turns are the ones that are justified. You know, you don't necessarily need to do anything bad. You could just come out and say, look, I'm fed up with the way things are going and I want change. And that's pretty much what Bret Hart did. And Shawn Michaels came out and said that, listen, Mark, man, you think all of this is yours. You know, the fans have every right to cheer or boo whoever they want. They've even booed me a few times, but you know, I choose to live my life the way I want. You just put on a facade. And Bret earlier in the show made comments about the fans preferring to cheer over Shawn Michaels, a guy who wears earrings and has tattoos, and pretty much told the fans to go to hell. And Shawn Michaels even went as far as to say to Bret Hart that, "What were you doing looking at Playgirl? You just couldn't help yourself, could you, Bret?" So very heated back and forth exchange. And Bret Hart would officially cement his heel status by attacking Shawn Michaels from behind, going after his injured knee and wrapping it in a figure four leg lock around the ring post and just tearing in Shawn Michaels' knee. Shawn Michaels was taken out of action for a few months, and Bret Hart would come out of this with nuclear heat. And then the following week, during a match between British Bulldog and Owen Hart, Bret Hart came out and said, "What are you two doing? Why are you fighting? This is exactly what the people want. They want to see us fighting. They want to see us at each other's throats. Well, I say it stops now. We're a family. We need to get together and we need to start acting like one again. Davey, you're my brother in law. You're married to my sister, Diana. Owen, you're my brother. I used to take you to school every single day. I love you. and Owen Hart would break down in tears, and we would see the birth of the new Hart Foundation. And as the three embraced, you could see Bret Hart's look of disdain towards the fans, and Bret Hart pretty much non-verbally spat on every single fan worldwide. Wow. Bret Hart as a heel was just absolutely incredible. So the new Hart Foundation would see Jim the Anvil Neidhart and Brian Pillman added to the fold, and Bret Hart would go on to face Stone Cold again at In Your House Revenge of the Taker, and the winner would go on to face The Undertaker at the following pay per view, Cold Day in Hell, and Stone Cold would win the match by DQ. And around this time, Bret Hart was injured and in a wheelchair and just pretty much bad mouthing the American fans. And the interesting thing with Bret Hart as a heel, this is what makes his heel run so unique. He was a hated heel in the US and he was a beloved hero in Canada. It was a very unique dynamic that Bret Hart had with the fans. You know, to go back and forth as a face and a heel in different countries was quite amazing, you know, because Bret Hart, I never really looked at him as he changed that much. Obviously, he was a bit more rougher, but when you look at his personality, you know, if you took two promos from Bret Hart, one from the US and one from Canada, he pretty much wasn't that much different in his personality. Just the difference was the fan reaction. So if he said that I hate Shawn Michaels, the fans would boo him in the US. But if he said that in Canada, the fans would cheer him. So it's quite an amazing, unique relationship Bret Hart had as a character in different countries. So we would see Bret Hart and the Hart Foundation dominate the WWF. We would see them have a classic 10-man tag at In Your House Canadian Stampede, where Bret Hart, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, Owen Hart, British Bulldog, and Brian Pillman defeated Stone Cold, Ken Shamrock, Goldust, and the Legion of Doom, Hawk and Animal. And the Hart Foundation were red hot as they headed into SummerSlam, where Bret Hart defeated The Undertaker with a unlikely accidental assist from Shawn Michaels to become the WWF champion. And Bret Hart was red hot as a heel, even though he was still getting booed in America and cheered in Canada. Bret Hart didn't care. It was all about him. And as I said, Bret Hart as a heel, his turn was kind of justified. And he would work a singles match against the Patriot and defeated him to retain the WWF title. And he would also defend his title against The Undertaker at one night only and retain it by DQ. And it's interesting because around this time when Bret Hart was champion, he very rarely ever closed the show, you know, and throughout his whole heel run, he would close the show, but not that much as you think. It was usually Shawn Michaels or Stone Cold or sometimes The Undertaker closing out the show. So, you know, it's quite interesting that Bret Hart didn't really close the show that much as champion. And of course, Bret Hart would go on to work a tag match at In Your House Bad Blood, where he teamed up with his brother in law, the British Bulldog, to defeat the Patriot and Vader in a flag match. And this is where it would all lead to his final match in the WWF at Survivor Series 1997 in Montreal, Canada, where Bret Hart lost the WWF title to Shawn Michaels thanks to Vince McMahon, who screwed him out of the title after he rang the bell the moment Shawn Michaels locked in the sharpshooter. And throughout all of Bret Hart's heel run, he constantly butted heads with Shawn Michaels. They had brawls, they had massive heated arguments and traded words with one another. You had that infamous segment where Bret and Shawn's promo went over the time limit, and Shawn Michaels ended up super kicking Bret Hart out of his wheelchair. Wow. And even leading up to Survivor Series 1997, you could clearly see the personal animosity between these two just got really hot. And after Bret Hart's final match in WWF following Survivor Series 97, Bret Hart would leave the WWF and jump to WCW, where unfortunately Bret Hart's career would sadly be shortened and ultimately brought to an end. His whole WCW run will be covered for another future edition of this series. But overall, in terms of the success and failures of Bret's heel run, I would say it was a complete success. I really enjoyed Bret's work that he put out as a heel. His mic work was excellent. His in ring action hadn't really changed that much. He became a lot more aggressive, but he was still putting on great matches. And the way he would switch between US and Canada as a character was very unique and very enjoyable to watch. And I thought he was a tremendous heel, in my opinion. Very entertaining. A lot of what he said was very justified. Bret's not the greatest talker in the world, but I thought what he did during this time was excellent. And I guess, in a way, as we have gone through all of this, I guess you could say, in a way, Bret Hart was kind of responsible for the Attitude Era because look at it. You had his whole meltdown just before WrestleMania 13. He called Triple H and Shawn Michaels degenerates, which led to them naming themselves D-Generation X. You know, you had all these little things that were like the building blocks for the Attitude Era, and Bret Hart was right there. So obviously, Stone Cold, DX, The Rock, and a few other guys, to name a few, were all instrumental in carrying the company and making the Attitude Era what it was. But I think with Bret Hart's contributions and some of the things he did were like the building blocks for what we would come to know as the Attitude Era. Because, if you can name anyone else who helped kicked off the Attitude Era, obviously some are going to say Stone Cold did, and yeah, he deserves his credit, but I think you probably will have to give the nod to Bret. And I think a lot of the start, or at least the pre beginnings of the Attitude Era, can be traced back to Bret Hart turning heel. I can't think of anybody else. I wouldn't necessarily say Shawn Michaels. He played his part, but I wouldn't really give it all to Shawn. I would say Bret deserves some of the credit for what he did. Now, had Bret Hart stayed when the Attitude Era was blowing up, it would have been very interesting to see what kind of role he could have played. Obviously, him and Austin would have probably ended up waging a legendary war, maybe for longer, maybe with the title involved. Who knows? But what we did get during this time, as I said, was excellent, and I loved it. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on Bret Hart's 1997 heel run? Did you enjoy it? What was your favourite moment from that run? Was it Bret's meltdown before WrestleMania 13, or his heel turn the night after WrestleMania 13? And what was your favourite match from his heel run? Was it Stone Cold versus Bret Hart from WrestleMania 13, Bret Hart versus The Undertaker at SummerSlam 97, or the 10-man tag at In Your House Canadian Stampede? And what was your thoughts on Bret Hart's heel run? Was it a success or a failure? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Wrestling Discussion Series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.